welcome to Ekate's Crossing as we continue our journey of the 10th insight. Let's grab a card from the Shamanic medicine cards. So what do we need to reflect on while we listen to the 10th insight? Let's have a look here. What card are we going to reflect on today? This one here. Okay, the card we're looking at here is plant medicine. The truth. Ooh, what an interesting card in regards to the Celestine prophecy, the 10th insight. So let's have a look at the plant medicine. So let's have a look. A controversy means you are not sure what to deem as truth. It's like you've been fed false news. Shamans use plant medicine in journeying work to induce visions and heighten clarity. Plant medicine is a far cry from the synthetic pills and potions abundant today. When plant medicine is passed to you, you have the option to accept or reject its remedy. Do you want your life to remain as it is? Are you ready to see the truth? To distinguish between the dream state and the clear reality, indulge in the awakening that plant medicine can bring. If you're brave, want adventure, and are prepared to lose false comfort, plant medicine can bring you a stark understanding of who you are. The veil between worlds is ready to be torn down, so that you might discover that which has been deliberately hidden. Choose wisely, for plant medicine will lead you to the path of truth from which there is no return. Plant medicine revealed. Shamans have been using plant medicine for thousands of years. Plants are gifts from the gods, left on earth to teach and heal us. We can work with plant medicine for healing, vision work, and to find balance and harmony between ourselves and the planet. The use of plant medicine predates written human history. Archaeological evidence indicates humans were using herbs 60,000 years ago. Other divinatory meanings. Fully investigate a matter before making an agreement. It's time to leave an unhealthy situation. Check in with and trust your intuition. Someone is hiding something from you. Admit the truth before someone else reveals it. Live your truth. Plant medicine speaks. Awaken as I take you deep. My truth reveals you've been asleep. You'll see the world with bright new eyes. Assist those who still live the lies. Oh, what an interesting card for today. Okay, so let us continue this journey of the 10th insight. I quietly shut the motel door and eased out into the moonlight. The cool air and the tension sent a shiver through my body. Why, I thought, was I doing this? There was no proof that Charlene was still out in this valley, or that David's suspicions were correct, yet my gut told me that indeed something was wrong. For several hours I had mulled over calling the local sheriff, but what would I have said? That my friend was missing, and she'd been seen entering the forest of her own free will, but was perhaps in trouble, all based on a vague note that I found hundreds of miles away. Searching this wilderness would take hundreds of people, and I knew they would never mount such an effort without something more substantial. I paused and looked at the three-quarter moon rising above the trees. My plan was to cross the stream well east of the ranger's station, and then to proceed along the main path into the valley. I was counting on the moon to light my way, but not to be this bright. Visibility was at least 100 yards. I made my way past the edge of the pub to the area where David had camped. The site was completely clean. He'd even spread leaves and pine straw to remove any sign of his presence. To cross where I had planned, I would have to walk about 40 yards in plain sight of the ranger's station, where I could now see clearly. Through the station side window, two officers were busy in conversation. One rose from his seat and picked up a telephone. Crouching low, I pulled my pack up on my shoulders and walked out into the sandy flood wash that bordered the stream, and finally into the water itself, sloshing through mounds of smooth river stone and stepping over several decayed logs. A symphony of tree frogs and cricket erupted around me. I glanced at the rangers again. Both were still talking, oblivious to myself. At its deepest point, the moderately swift water reached my upper thigh, but in seconds I had moved across the 30 feet of current and into a stand of small pines. I carefully moved forward until I found the hiking path leading into the valley. Toward the east, the path disappeared into the darkness, and as I stared in that direction, more doubts entered my mind. What was this mysterious noise that so worried David? What might I stumble upon in the darkness out there? I shook off the fear. I knew I had to go on. But as a compromise, I walked only half a mile into the forest before making my well off the path into the heavily wooded area to raise the tent and spend the rest of the night. Glad to take off my wet boots and let them dry. It would be smarter to proceed in the daylight. The next morning I awoke at dawn thinking about David's cryptic remark about maintaining my intuition. And as I lay in my sleeping bag, I reviewed my own understanding of the seventh insight, particularly awareness of that the experience of synchronicity follows a certain structure. According to this insight, each of us, once we work to clear our past dramas, can identify certain questions that define our particular life situation. Questions related to our careers, relationships, where we should live, how we should proceed on our path. Then, if we remain aware, gut feelings, hunches, and intuitions will provide impressions of where to go, what to do with, and with whom we should speak in order to pursue an answer. After that, of course, a coincidence was supposed to occur, revealing the reason we were urged to follow such a course, and providing new information that pertained in some way to our question, leading us forward in our lives. How would maintaining the intuition help? Easing out of my sleeping bag, I pulled the tent flaps apart and checked outside. Sensing nothing unusual, I climbed out into the crisp fall air and walked back to the stream, where I washed my face in the cool water. Afterward, I packed up and headed east again, nibbling on a granola bar, and keeping myself hidden as much as possible in the tall trees that bordered the stream. After travelling perhaps 3 miles, a perceptible wave of fear and nervousness passed through my body, and I immediately felt fatigue. So I sat down and leaned against the tree, attempting to focus on my surroundings and gain inner energy. The sky was cloudless, and the morning sun danced through the trees and along the ground around me. I noticed a small green plant with yellow blossoms about 10 feet away, and focused on its beauty, already draped in full sunlight. It seemed brighter suddenly, its leaves a richer green. A rush of fragrance reached my awareness along with the musty smell of leaves and black soil. Simultaneously from the trees far towards the north, I heard the call of several crows. The richness of the sound amazed me, but surprisingly I couldn't distinguish their exact location. As I concentrated on listening, I became fully aware of dozens of individual sounds that made up the morning chorus. Songbirds in the trees above me, a bumblebee among the wild daisies at the edge of the stream, the water gurgling around the rocks and the fallen branches, and then something else, barely perceptible, a low dissonant hum. I stood up and looked around. What was this noise? I picked up my pack and proceeded east. Because of the crunching sound created by my footsteps on the fallen leaves, I had to stop and listen very intensely to still hear the hum. But it was there. Ahead the woods ended, and I entered a large meadow, colourful with wildflowers and thick, 2 foot tall sage grass that seemed to go on for half a mile. The breeze brushed the tops of the sage in currents. When I'd almost reached the edge of the meadow, I noticed a patch of blackberry brambles growing beside a fallen tree. The bushes struck me as exceedingly beautiful, and I walked over to look at them more closely, imagining that they were full of berries. As I did this, I experienced an acute feeling of déjà vu. The surroundings suddenly seemed very familiar, as though I had been here in this valley before, eaten berries before. How is that possible? I sat down on the trunk of the fallen tree. Presently, in the back of my mind, rose a picture of a crystal clear pool of water, and several tiers of waterfalls in the background. A location that, as I imagined it, seemed equally familiar, and again I felt anxious. Without warning, an animal of some kind rang noisily from the berry patch, startling me and heading north for about 20 feet, and then abruptly stopped. The creature was hidden in the tall sage, and I had no idea what it was, but I could follow its wake in the grass. After a few minutes, it darted back a few feet into the south, remained motionless again for several seconds, then darted 10 or 20 feet back again towards the north, only to stop again. I guessed it was a rabbit, although its movement seemed especially peculiar. For 5 or 6 minutes I watched the area where the animal had last moved, and slowly walked that way. As I closed to about 5 feet, it suddenly sped away again towards the north. At one point, before it disappeared into the distance, I glimpsed the white tail and hind legs of a large rabbit. I smiled and proceeded east again along the trail, coming finally to the end of the meadow, where I entered an area of thick woods. There I spotted a small creek, perhaps 4 feet wide, that entered the stream from the left. I knew this must be the landmark David had mentioned. I was to turn northward. Unfortunately, there was no trail in that direction, and worse, the woods along the creek were a snarl of thick saplings and prickly pears. I couldn't get through. I would have to backtrack into the meadow behind me until I could find a way around. I made my way back into the grass and walked along the edge of the woods, looking for a break in the dense undergrowth. To my surprise, I ran into the trail the rabbit had made in the sage and followed its path until I caught sight of the small creek again. Here, the dense undergrowth receded, partially allowing me to push my way through into an area of larger old-growth trees where I could follow the creek due north. After proceeding for what I judged to be about another mile, I could see a range of footfalls rising in the distance on both sides of the creek. Walking further, I realized that these hills were forming steep canyon walls, and that up ahead was what looked to be the only entrance. When I arrived, I sat down beside a large hickory and surveyed the scene. 100 yards on both sides of the creek, the hills butted off in 50-foot high limestone bluffs, then bent outward into the distance, forming a huge bowl-like canyon, perhaps 2 miles wide and at least 4 long. The first half mile was thinly wooded and covered with more sage. I thought about the hum and listened carefully for 5 or 10 minutes, but it seemed to have ceased. Finally, I reached into my pack and pulled out a small butane stove and lit the burner, then filled a small pan with water from my canteen, emptied the contents of a package of freeze-dried vegetable stew into the water, and set the pan on the flame. For a few moments I watched as strands of stream twisted upward and disappeared into the breeze. In my Riviera, I again saw the pool and the waterfall in my mind's eye, only this time I seemed to be there walking up as if to greet someone. I shook the picture from my head. What was happening? These images were growing more vivid. First David in another time, now these falls. Movement in the canyon caught my eye. I glanced at the creek and then beyond to a lone tree 200 yards away, which had already lost most of its leaves. It was now covered with what looked like large crows. Several flew down to the ground. It came to me that these were the same crows I'd heard earlier. As I watched, they suddenly all flew and dramatically circled above the tree. At the same moment, I could hear their cawing again, although as before the loudness of their cries didn't match the distance. They sounded much closer. Splashing water and hissing steam pulled my attention back to the camp stove. Boiling stew was overflowing onto the flame. I grabbed the pan with a towel, turning off the gas with the other hand. When the boiling subsided, I returned the pan to the burner and looked back at the tree in the distance. The crows were gone. I hurriedly ate the stew, cleaned up and packed the gear, then headed into the canyon. As soon as I passed the bluffs, I noticed the colours had amplified. The sage seemed amazingly golden, and I noticed for the first time that it was peppered with hundreds of wildflowers, white and yellow and orange. From the cliffs to the east, the breeze carried the scent of cedar and pine. Although I continued to follow the creek running north, I kept my eye on the tall tree to the left where the crows had circled. When it was directly west of me, I noticed the creek was suddenly widening. I made my way through some willows and cattails and realized I had come to a small pool that fed not only the creek I was following, but a second creek angling off further to the southeast. At first I thought this pool was the one I had seen in my mind, but there were no waterfalls. Ahead was another surprise. To the north of the pool, the creek had completely disappeared. Where was the water coming from? Then it dawned on me that the pool and the creek I'd been following were all fed from an enormous underground spring surfacing at this location. To my left, 50 feet away, I noticed a mild rise on which grew 3 sycamore trees, each more than 2 feet in diameter. A perfect place to think for a moment. I walked over and snuggled in among them, sitting down and leaning against the trunk of one of the trees. From this perspective, the 2 remaining trees were 6 or 7 feet to my front, and I could look both to the left to see the crow tree, and to the right to observe the spring. The question now was where to go from here. I could wander for days without seeing any sign of Charlene, but what about these images? I closed my eyes and attempted to bring back the earlier picture of the pool and waterfall, but as much as I struggled, I couldn't remember the exact details. Finally, I gave up and gazed out again at the grass and wildflowers, and then at the 2 sycamores right in front of me. Their trunks were a scaly collage of dark grey and white bark, streaked with brush strokes of tan and multiple shades of amber. As I focused on the beauty of the scene, these colours seemed to intensify and grow more iridescent. I took another deep breath and looked out again at the meadow and flowers. The crow tree seemed particularly illuminated. I picked up my pack and walked towards the tree. Immediately the image of the pool and waterfalls flashed across my mind. This time I tried to remember the entire picture. The pool I saw was large, almost an acre, and the water flowing into it came in from the rear, cascading down a series of steep terraces. Two smaller falls dropped, only about 15 feet, but the last dropped over a long 30-foot bluff into the water below. Again in the image that came to mind, I seemed to be walking up to the scene, meeting someone. The sound of a vehicle to my left stopped me firmly in my tracks. I kneeled down behind several small bushes. From the forest on the left, a grey jeep moved across the meadow, heading southeast. I knew that Forest Service policy prohibited private vehicles this far into the wilderness, so I expected to see a Forest Service signal on the jeep's door. To my surprise, it was unmarked. When it was directly in front of me, 50 yards away, the vehicle stopped. Through the foliage, I could make out a lone figure inside. He was surveying the area with field glasses, so I lay flat and hid myself completely. Who was he? The vehicle started up again and quickly vanished out of sight in the trees. I turned and sat down, listening again for the hum. Still nothing. I thought about returning to town and finding another way to search for Charlene, but deep inside I knew there was no alternative. I shut my eyes and thought again of David's instruction to maintain my intuition, and finally retrieved the full image of the pool and the falls in my mind's eye. As I got to my feet and headed again towards the crow tree, I tried to keep the details of the scene in the back of my mind. Suddenly I heard the shrill cry of another bird, this time a hawk. To my left, far past the tree, I could barely make out her shape. She was streaking hard towards north as I increased my pace, trying to keep the bird in sight for as long as possible. The bird's appearance seemed to increase my energy, and even after she disappeared over the horizon, I kept moving in the direction she'd been flying, walking for another mile and a half over a series of rocky foothills. At the top of the third hill I froze again, hearing another sound in the distance, a sound much like water running. No, it was water falling. Carefully I walked down the slope and through a deep gorge that invoked another experience of déjà vu. I climbed the next hill, and there, beyond the crest, were the pool and falls, exactly as I had pictured them, except that the area was much larger and more beautiful than I had pictured. The pool itself was almost 2 acres, nestled in a cradle of enormous boulders and outcroppings of crystal clear water, a sparkling blue under the afternoon sky. To the left and the right of the pool were several large oak trees, themselves surrounded by a multicolored array of smaller maples and sweet gums and willows. The far edge of the pool was an explosion of white spray and mist, the foam accentuated by the churning action of the 2 smaller falls higher up at the ridge. I realized there was no runoff from the pool. The water went underground from here, traveling silently, to emerge as the source of the large spring near the crow tree. As I surveyed the beauty of the sight, the sense of déjà vu increased. The sounds, the colours, the scene from the hill, it all looked extremely familiar. I had been at this location too, but when? I moved down to the pool and then walked around the entire area, to the edge to taste the water, up the cascades to feel the spray from each of the falls, over atop the large boulders where I could touch the trees. I wanted to immerse myself in the place. Finally, I stretched out on one of the flatter rocks, 20 feet above the pool, and looked towards the afternoon sun with my eyes closed, feeling its rays against my face. In that moment, another familiar sensation swept across my body, a particular warmth and regard I hadn't sensed in months. In fact, until this instant, I'd forgotten its exact feeling and character, although it was perfectly recognizable now. I opened my eyes and turned around quickly, certain of whom I was about to see. Okay, that's it for me for today. Don't forget to check the links down below. Check the links on my channel. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you know when the next video will be uploaded. Take care and blessed be.